Welcome back, everybody, to the School Leadership Show. With me, as always, is my consistent co-host, Jen David Lang. Have I used consistent yet?
But I don't know. I'm not feeling too excited about that one.
Well, was it, well, let's see, was it Wordsworth who said that a foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of small minds? I don't know, something like that. But anyway, that's not what we're here for, because we're not here to talk about literature in ELA today, are we, Jen?
We are not, as former math teachers.
Yeah,
we are excited.
We're very excited about this book and our guest today, who is about to tell Jen and me how bad our pedagogy was when we were math teachers. We have Dr. Peter Liljedahl with us today. I got it right, didn't I, Peter?
Yeah.
Right, fantastic. So Peter has written a book called Building Thinking Classrooms in Mathematics, 14 Teaching Practices for Enhancing Learning. Hence why I said Jen and I are about to find out what terrible math teachers we were at one point. So super excited about this. Jen and I are such big math pedagogy nerds that we're your people, Peter. So you want to talk a little bit about your background and the research you did and how you decided to write this book?
Oh, okay. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. Super excited to be here. I'm coming to you actually today from Cedar Rapids, Iowa. So I've been working with teachers here. Today I was working with K-6 teachers. Tomorrow I'm going to work with 7 to 12 teachers around some of the ideas that are in this book. So about me, well, I am a former high school math teacher, which is only partially true. I actually taught math, physics, and English composition. And I taught in the Vancouver School District in West Coast of Canada. And high school in Vancouver is grade 8 through 12. I taught all of those grades. And I taught, like I said, across several different subjects. And then I did something a lot of teachers in Canada at least do, is I did my master's degree while I was a classroom teacher. And, it was an amazing, rewarding program, but there's some tough sledding there, like weekends, evenings, giving up some of your summer, which in the master's led to a PhD. And when I started the PhD, I decided I needed to focus. I applied for and received an ed leave from the school district. Always with the intention of going back. Like, I loved being a classroom teacher. There's something about the organized chaos that just feeds my ADHD mind. But it's like, and I didn't realize how much I loved the classroom until about my second year of the PhD program, when I started to really miss being in the classroom. And so I manufactured an opportunity for me to get back into classrooms. And I didn't want to go back. I could have gone back as a substitute teacher. I could have gotten rehired, but I wanted to just do this sort of like, I wanted to be a fly on the wall. I wanted to really closely observe student learning. And for those of you who are listening, you might think, oh yeah, well, my teachers do that all the time. They observe learning every day. And that is true. But I wanted to observe it from behind the facade. So what I mean by that is we get to see students learn every day, but what a teacher gets to observe is entirely dictated by what the students are willing to show you. And they are very good at projecting facades. And I wanted to observe learning. I wanted to understand what was really happening for students. I wanted to understand their lived experience in the classroom. And I knew I couldn't get at that from in front of the classroom. I needed to be behind the curtain, so to speak. So I created a situation where I got to visit 40 different classrooms in 40 different schools. And I was kind of following this thread of good teacher, like the guise of good teacher allowed me to get into these classrooms. A bit of flattery always helps. And because I was following this thread, I saw a lot of diversity. Sometimes I was in kindergarten classrooms, sometimes in grade 12. Sometimes I was in French schools and English schools, because in Canada we have 2 languages. Sometimes I was in private schools, public schools, inner city schools, urban schools, rural schools, low socioeconomic, high socioeconomic. Like, I was seeing a lot of diversity. And yet everywhere I went, I saw students not thinking. And this was sort of the epiphany for me. It started slowly at first and then became clearer and clearer and clearer. Every single classroom I went into, I saw students not thinking. And that is a problem.
So
Because
let me
it's
ask
student-
you, I want to ask
Yeah.
you, so how did you know they weren't thinking?
Okay, well, I'll get to that in a minute.
Okay.
First of all, is this a problem? Yeah, it's a problem. If students are not thinking, they're not learning, period. This is something we've known in psychology and education for decades. If students are not thinking, they're not learning. And what I was seeing was a lot of not thinking. At least that was my sense. That was my sense. I had a sense that they weren't thinking. So after I finished up these 40 different classrooms, I decided I wanted to understand this better. I wanted to study this phenomenon more closely. I wanted to answer two questions. Question number one, is it actually true that they're not thinking? Like, is that true? Question number two, if it is true, what are they doing? Because they got to be doing something. So I dove back into 15 of these classrooms and spent intense amounts of time, not just like a single visit. I mean, like multiple visits, listening to students, watching students, talking to students, joining them, being part of that, like just trying to understand their lived experience. And that research, that deep research revealed that my sense was correct, that in fact, 80% of students were doing no thinking whatsoever. Let me say that again. 80% were doing no thinking whatsoever. Not, at least not the kind of thinking we know they need to do in order to be able to be successful.
Now,
And-
what was when you figured that out, like, what was your reaction to that? Are you as surprised as Jen and I appear to be right now?
So that was like this was a slowly emerging thing. First, I had the sense. Then I was starting to dig into these classrooms. The data was starting to reveal itself, but still, like even saying it out loud, it's just such a shocking number. The 20% there were 20% who were thinking, but then again, they were only thinking for 20% of the time. Okay, that's not to say they wouldn't think for longer, but that's all the time that teachers gave them. Because although I was in these classrooms and I was capturing this data that these kids were not thinking, that doesn't mean they weren't busy. The teachers were keeping them busy. They were doing a lot of stuff, right? They were writing notes. They were filling in worksheets. They were doing turn and talks. They were having collaboration. They were using manipulators. But the kinds of things that were being asked of them were not actually requiring them to think. Now, Mike, you asked earlier, how did I know? Like, how do you measure that? So this is difficult to measure. Thinking is a cognitive process, and as such, it's invisible. Right now, my sense was that they weren't thinking to begin with. So how do you turn this into empirical research? So what I started to do was I started to carve away anything that clearly couldn't be thinking. So I started observing student behavior, and I started carving away all behaviors that clearly weren't thinking. So first one, slacking. They're just off task. They're playing on their cell phone, talking to their friends, staring out the window. Not thinking, clearly not thinking. If there's thinking in this room, it's not in those students. Carve that one off. The next one was stalling. Can I go to the bathroom? I need to sharpen my pencil. I forgot something in my locker. I got to get a drink of water. Like, one of the things we have to understand about stalling behaviors is that these are also off-task behaviors. They're not thinking. Going to the bathroom is not a thinking behavior, right? But it's an allowable off-task behavior, right? Playing on a cell phone is not allowed. Going to the bathroom is allowed, but it's not a thinking behavior, so they're gone. The next one were the fakers. So the fakers are the ones who pretend to be working, right? Some of them are like overacting. It's easy to spot. Some of them are absolutely brilliant. There's not a chance a teacher would spot it unless they were in my position behind the curtain, right? They're not thinking. They're just pretending. Okay, so now we've lost the slackers, the stallers, the fakers. And those together make up about 30% of our students. So and 20% were thinking, like 20% is what's left over here. So what were the other 50% doing? They were mimicking. So what do I mean by mimicking? So mimicking, I mean, they like the teacher would say, okay, just do this, and then they would do that. So they weren't actually trying to think their way through the problem. They weren't actually trying to understand. They were just trying to reproduce. And what we have to understand about mimicking is not a thinking behavior. In fact, mimicking is not even a learning behavior. Mimicking is a production behavior. Mimicking is what students do to produce for you the things that you have asked for in exchange for praise, gold stars, and grades, right? It's a production behavior. It's not a thinking or a learning behavior. And 50% of the students were just mimicking. And mimicking is really easy to spot, right? So like you carve away all of these and what's left is 20% of kids, right? But I can't guarantee that thinking's happening there either. I can just guarantee if thinking is happening, that's where it's happening. So that's how I started doing the research. There was massive evolution in the methodologies over the 15 years that I worked. And we started to find much more efficient ways and much more accurate ways of measuring thinking later on. But that's how it all started. This shocking realization that the vast majority of our students are not thinking. And if they're not thinking, they're not learning. And what are we going to do about that?
So I'm thinking of the methodology, and I know you said it changed over time. So the 14 practices that enhance learning in mathematics, from your perspective, did those emerge as counters to what wasn't working, or did those emerge as things that you were able to tease out from the kids who were actually thinking?
No.
Like how did it go?
The first one is more correct.
Okay.
So, but it's not 100% accurate. So what happened was I realized, okay, we have to do something about this, right? And so the research started, and the research was much more driven about how can I actually get students to think? What practices can get students to think? And there was another observation that happened in this visiting 40 different classrooms in 40 different schools that was really instrumental in this. It was the realization. So I picked 40 as my number because I was hoping to see a huge variety of classrooms and a huge variety of classroom practices. I didn't. I did 40 different classrooms in 40 different schools across multiple districts. And I saw like classrooms look more alike than they look different. And I kept seeing the same practices over and over and over again, right? Like the lecture, the Q&A, the demonstration, maybe a bit of group work, and a ton of individual seat work. Like the number of practices across these 40 classrooms, I could count on basically one hand.
Now let's pause there for a second, because I think this is a really big deal that I think we need to spend a second on. Like, imagine if we tried in public K-12 education to achieve that level of consistency across classrooms. The hue and cry that would result about making teaching cookie cutter and taking away the joy and the art of teaching, that would come down on us like a ton of bricks. Yet you go in there and everybody looks the same.
Yeah.
So were you surprised? Were you sad? Were you like,
I was hopeful to begin with that maybe at the next school, at the next district, that I would see something different, but I kept seeing the same thing. And it was troubling. It was also incredibly introspective because what I was seeing was me as well.
Right. That's what I'm afraid of, because we're about to get to the point where we find out how Jen and I did it like everybody else. So what emerged out of this was there is this incredible inertia, this momentum that is holding math education and in fact, I was in classrooms that were not math as well, but in holding teacher practice in a certain sort of stasis. And the fact that everywhere I went, classrooms looked more alike, started to reveal to me that these are institutionally normative structures. And they're very robust institutionally normative structures. They are structures that have been with us for 170 years, since the dawn of public education, right? Like, yeah, things have changed, right? But students are still sitting and teachers are still standing, and
and students are writing in their notebooks and teachers are writing on whiteboards. And yeah, we've gone from blackboards to green boards to whiteboards to smart boards, and the chair's not always attached to the desk anymore. But by and large, classrooms look more alike than they look alike across decades. And what that revealed to me was this realization that if everywhere I go, I see students not thinking, and everywhere I go, I see these incredibly stable normative structures, are they connected? And if they are connected, it means I'm going to have to break norms to get students to think. And that was my starting point. If students are not thinking, I'm going to have to break some norms. And that became my research. And for the next 15 years, I worked with over 400 teachers, K to 12. Our mandate was simple: break norms, see if it increases student thinking. Can we get more students thinking? Can we get them thinking for longer? And the first 6 months of this research was crazy fun. Like we were just trying anything we could think of. We were breaking norms left and right and center. We were throwing whatever we could come up with at the wall to see what would stick. And here's a frightening thing: everything stuck. Everything stuck. It didn't matter what we tried. As long as we were breaking norms, we got more thinking out of students, which told us two things. One, my conjecture was correct. The normative structures were actually preventing the thinking. Conjecture, and number two, it revealed that we weren't so much teaching students to think, we were liberating them to think. They already had it in them. It was the norms that were preventing this from coming out. These incredibly stable institutionally normative structures that were driving students to conform and comply rather than think. And once we started breaking through that, we started to actually get students to think. But I woke up one day and I realized that like I'd lost all control of the data, because we were trying like 4 or 5 things at a time, and we were seeing these amazing thinking practices emerge. But the problem was that we couldn't link the student behavior to any one teacher practice because we had too much noise in the system. And that's when I deconstructed teaching into 14 core classroom routines, right? These are the 4 core classroom routines everybody does. Everybody uses tasks to some extent. You don't even have to be teaching math. Everybody uses tasks. Everybody uses group work to some extent, right? Everybody has students work somewhere. There is some work surface that they're working at, right? Every teacher answers questions. Every teacher has students do homework. Every teacher has students write notes. Every teacher does formative and summative assessment, right? Like we all do these things. These are core classroom routines. And those became my variables. And then the question was, how can I experiment on each of those variables independently? Like, let's take group work, for example, right? Like, can we experiment on that? And all my research started the same way. We started by doing status quo research. So status quo research was, okay, well, what's happening currently? So what happens in group work? Well, teachers have 2 main ways that they do groups. They form collaborative groups, right? Number one, strategic groups. So this is where we have a goal and we carefully make the groups to meet that goal. So maybe our goal is differentiation. So I'll make ability groups. Maybe my goal is to increase productivity. I'll make mixed ability groups. Maybe my goal is to just have peace and quiet. So I'm going to keep those certain students apart, right? Whatever the goal, I'm going to make the groups carefully. This is the dominant grouping strategy we see at elementary schools, right? At high school, we're more likely to see a teacher say, work with who you want. So that's self-selected grouping, right? So there's the 2 dominant paradigms that exist within education already. That's the status quo. So let's study that. How effective is that? So we did this massive survey on hundreds of kids who were in these types of settings. We asked one question. If you knew you were going to work in groups today on a task, what is the likelihood you would offer an idea? That was it. Okay. 80% of kids said that they were unlikely or highly unlikely to offer an idea.
Well, time out. 2 remaining. 80%.
Yeah.
That's unbelievable and disheartening and sad at the same time.
Yeah. 80% are going into those grouping settings not ready to offer an idea. Why? Because they know what their role is. Their role is not to lead. It's not to think. Their role is to follow. It doesn't matter if we're doing self-selected groupings or strategic groupings, the kids know what their role is. We interviewed kids, hundreds of kids. After grade 2, every single kid could tell us why they were in the group the teacher put them in.
Really? Like to the extent of I'm in this group because the other kids are smarter than I am and I
Yeah.
need help?
Yeah.
Or I'm in this group because I'm the smartest kid and these other kids need help?
Yeah.
Okay.
After grade 2, every single kid in a strategic grouping setting could tell us what role, why they were there. They know their roles, and then they live down to those expectations. So that's the status quo. 80% of kids enter into a collaborative setting not ready to think. They're just going to follow.
Wow. Okay.
So then
then
what do we do about it?
What do you do about it? Let's hear it.
So it turns out that what turned out to be the optimal was we go with random groups. Except random wasn't good enough. It had to be visibly random. The kids had to see it was random. Because the first time we did random groups, we said, here's some random groups. And the kids were like, random, you say. It had to be visibly random. And it turned out, the research showed it had to be frequent, about once every 60 to 75 minutes, that we re-randomized them. Okay, so we did that 3 weeks. Visibly random groups every 60 to 75 minutes, or every period, basically. Every time the kids started a new math class, they were in a new random group. 3 weeks in, we ran the same survey. What is the likelihood, if you knew you were going to work in a group today on a task, what is the likelihood you would offer an idea? Now, remember the baseline data. Status quo data was 80% entered those groups.
Wait, don't tell us. Jen, we're going to guess. Price is Right rules apply. Closest without going over. All right. So what do you think?
It's the reverse. I would say now 80%.
80%. I'm going to go 81% and Price is Right you. So what is it?
So after 3 weeks of visibly random groups, 100% of students, 100%.
Peter, you're making it up.
Nope. 100% of students said that they were likely or highly likely to offer an idea.
Just because the groups were visibly randomized?
Yeah.
I want to put a pause on this for a second, just because, I think what's interesting about the practices that you came up with is you didn't throw the whole thing out, right? You didn't say that really the only way to get our kids to learn mathematics is to, throw them experientially on teams working at City Hall, addressing issues of, unhoused migrants and, coming up with formulas. You didn't throw the whole thing out, the whole structure of school. And that the ideas that you came up with work with teachers using their current curriculum, their current class size, however many kids, the same one teacher and many kids. So I think that, just to reiterate for our listeners, that these are very practical ideas. No one's asking you to go out and buy a new curriculum. No one's asking you to take down walls in your building or send kids on 9 to 5 field trips.
This was really important to the research.
Yeah.
Right? Everything inside the classroom was negotiable, but we still worked inside the 4 walls of the classroom with the curriculum that we had and the bell schedule that was given to us. Right? That's it. That's the lived experience of teachers. That's what hems them in. But let's see what can happen inside of that space. Yeah, 100%. Right? And why? Why? And what was interesting about it, though, was 50% of them said it probably won't lead to a solution, but I'm going to offer an idea.
And they were okay with that. That's pretty cool. So, all right. So you saw the grouping emerge as one of them. I heard you mention one at the beginning that really piqued my interest a little bit. The idea of the surfaces on which kids work. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Okay. So what's the default? What's the status quo? Writing
at a desk on paper.
Yep. At a desk on paper, in their notebook, in a duotang, in a binder, right? In fact, we were encountering kids who spend more time in a 24-hour period sitting and writing in a notebook than they spend sleeping. Think about that.
Ouch. Yeah.
5 to 6 hours of the day in classroom, sitting and writing. At home, homework, sitting and writing.
Also, yeah.
right?
Sorry, yeah.
Okay, so that's a status quo. Now, what is it about the notebook and having kids write in, right? I'm not saying that's bad. It's just that just because it's good for some things doesn't mean it's good for everything, right? So if we want students writing notes, maybe that is a good place to do notes, but is that the right place to do a thinking activity? So we tested that. Turns out it's not. In fact, it turns out it's the worst place to have students do the work. So what turned out to be the best? Having these random groups of 3 standing and working at vertical whiteboards was the best. Except it didn't have to be a whiteboard. It just had to be vertical and erasable. So like a window works, the side of a file cabinet works, a vinyl picnic table cover stapled to a bulletin board works, a sheet of cellophane taped up on a wall works. It doesn't have to be a whiteboard. It just had to be vertical and erasable. And you had to use whiteboard markers, and it was 1 marker per group. So why erasable? Why is that so important, right? It turns out that risk is a barrier to thinking. And when students feel at risk, they don't feel safe to think. So we compared, for example, students working at a vertical whiteboard right next to a group working on vertical flip chart paper, for example. Okay, 5 minutes in, the whiteboard was covered in work. 5 minutes in, the flip chart paper was still blank. Because it has to be perfect to go on the flip chart paper. So they don't feel safe to actually just try something. It has to be perfect. On the whiteboard, it's just like, let's just try. Let's just start. If it's wrong, we can erase it. And then they just start. And how do we get to perfect? We get to perfect through imperfect, right? But why vertical? Why is that so important? Because some of the listeners might be going, okay, yeah, I get the whiteboard could be better. But, I only have room, my classroom or the teacher who's doing this, their classroom only has room for 5 kids to be up at the whiteboard or 5 groups. The rest of the groups are going to have to work at tables. No, we tried that. We compared that as well, right? So what is it that vertical makes vertical so good? Well, number 1, when it's vertical, everybody in the group is oriented to the work the same way. When they're sitting, someone always is oriented correctly and everyone else is sideways or upside down, which creates a power dynamic and ownership in a way that isn't equal. When it's vertical, the students can see other groups work. That promotes knowledge mobility. And that, I have this saying that the smartest person in the room is the room. We just got to get that knowledge moving around the room.
Wait, Peter, but if the kids can see each other's work, won't they cheat?
Right. So this is a pervasive question I get asked. In all the years I've been doing this, in less than 5 times have I seen a group actually stand and just copy what another group has done. They'll look, they'll go, oh, they're using a T-chart. We should try that. And then they take that idea and they make it their own. What happens in reality is that the group works on their own until their resources run out, until they run out of ideas, until they run out of brain, until they run out of strategies. Then they start looking around. They're going, they're going backwards. Let's try that. They grab a strategy and then they apply it, right? They don't copy. They don't copy verbatim what another group is doing, right? They're just gathering resources. When it's vertical, I'm a better teacher. I don't have to wait for that quiz on Friday to see if my students understand it. I can see it right now, and I can intervene right now. We don't have to go through 5 days of them not understanding and doing it wrong before I clue into that. I get that feedback immediately, and I can leverage that intervention exactly where it's needed, apply it exactly when it's needed. And all of these are really good reasons why standing and working on vertical whiteboards are good. But they were all eclipsed by one interesting piece of data. And this was a piece of data that took over 2 years to get at. It turns out that it's not that standing is so good, it's that sitting is so bad. And I don't mean like sitting is the new smoking bad. I mean that when students are sitting, it turns out that they feel anonymous. And the further they sit from the teacher, the more anonymous they feel. And when students feel anonymous, they disengage. And that's both a conscious and a subconscious act. And they put themselves in those positions so that they can be anonymous, so that they can disengage. Now, this turns out to not be exclusive to students. Think about the last professional development workshop you went to. You walk into the room. Professional development workshops always fill from the back. Why?
It's like church, because you
Yeah.
want to be able to escape and not participate.
You want to be able to, you want to be anonymous.
Yeah.
What sitting did was it made students anonymous. What standing up did was it took away their anonymity. It took away their anonymity. They didn't feel anonymous. They didn't feel invisible. They felt seen. And so they didn't disengage. And what's interesting is about these two practices that we've talked about just now, random groups and vertical surfaces, coupled with a thinking task, we went from 20% of students thinking for 20% of the time to 80% of students thinking for 80% of the time, just with those three practices: thinking tasks, random groups, vertical surfaces. And I don't mean over the course of a year or a term or a quarter. I mean like in 3 days. In 3 days, and we're talking about the same classroom. This is not like we have a control group and then a study group. No, we go into a non-thinking classroom, implement these three practices, and in 3 days, we got 80% of the kids thinking for 80% of the time.
All right. So talk about what makes, so these first two things are, I mean, they're pretty concrete, right? The random groups thinking or standing in a vertical surface, working together. Great. So, but what makes, like, what are the essential elements of a good thinking task?
So the first thing we have to understand about a task is all tasks are inert, right? All tasks are thinking tasks or not thinking tasks, right? To a 5-year-old, what number comes before 17 is an amazing thinking task, right? Like that's not so much to a grade 9 student, right? Asking a grade 9 student what's 12 plus 23 is not a great thinking task, but an amazing thinking task for grade 1s, right? And asking a grade 12 student to factor or to solve a cubic is an amazing thinking task. All tasks are great thinking tasks until we show them how to do it. Then they become mimicking tasks, right? So what constitutes a thinking task is really about how you use it and when you use it and what you do before you give it to them, right? So you open up your textbook, whatever resource you have, you open up your textbook to a random page and blindly point at any question there, and you have an amazing thinking task until you show them how to do it. Then it's a mimicking task, right? So what constitutes a thinking task is anything that the students don't yet know how to do. Because thinking is what we do when we don't know what to do. If we know what to do, we just do it. So our resources are full of these thinking tasks. So what we want to do is start positioning these as things for students to think about rather than things for them to mimic.
So Peter, identify, so let's take it, solving a cubic equation and
or a quadratic. Let's talk about quadratics.
Yeah, let's go quadratics. They're easier. So a system of quadratic inequalities. Let's go crazy, right?
Oh,
but
wow. Okay.
But I can just hear teachers, and I even had this reaction, like, well, I don't have time for them to fumble around and try to figure it out. I got to show them how to do that because I got to move on to the next thing because we have a test at the end. So all right, you must have come across that before. So what's the answer to that?
Okay, so let's jump ahead a little bit. Okay, so let's say we've unfurled 6 to 8 of the practices and they're going well in the classroom. What does that look like in a thinking classroom now? Like, I think you can all picture the students get randomized. We tend to use cards to randomize them. We give them a thinking task and off they go at the whiteboards and they plug away at these whiteboards. And then there's other practices like we've defronted the classroom. We're trying to avoid answering too many other questions. We're doing what's called thin slicing, which is that it's not just any random questions. We're giving a very specific sequence of tasks, right? Tasks that go from very easy and they just gradually get harder until the kids are figuring out tasks that are really, really difficult, right? And so on and so forth. There are lots of practices in place. So what does that look like when we actually launch and the kids are doing this? Well, so let me take you through a couple of lessons that I've done recently or I've observed teachers do recently. So factoring quadratics, typically an Algebra 1 or Algebra 2 topic, right? Most teachers will spend anywhere between 5 to 8 lessons on that topic, right? When we do it, we do the entire unit in 75 minutes, the whole unit. And every single group is mastering it within 75 minutes. right? Pythagorean theorem. Okay, that's usually a week. We do it in 45 minutes. Solving 1 and 2 step equations, algebra 1. Okay, solving 1 and 2 step equations. How many months do you spend on that in algebra 1? We do it in 45 minutes, right? I've done solving 1 and 2 step equations with kids as young as grade 4, right? I've done factoring quadratics with kids as young as grade 5. And like they go through the entire sequence. Now, how is that possible?
Yes, how is it possible?
Because when students are not thinking, everything is difficult, it takes a long time, and they don't learn it and they don't retain it. But when students are thinking, anything is possible. So when a teacher says, I have too much to cover, I don't have time to do all this thinking classroom stuff, my answer is, you have too much to cover. You don't have time to not get your students to think. If they're not thinking, you are fighting a losing battle. You gotta get them to think. And when that happens, anything is possible. Anything.
Good question, Peter. Have you thought of, or do you have videos of either the individual practices or all of them together? Like when you say in 45 minutes, you can teach.
Yeah.
Do you have some videos that we can share with our listeners?
So let me tell you a story about that. So the book that you're talking about, the Building Thinking Classrooms book, as we were finalizing that, we were set to film in classrooms all of these practices. And that book was supposed to be embedded with QR codes so that every practice you could just scan with your phone, you could see the practice in action. Okay. We were all set to film all that. The film crew was set, all the classrooms were set. It was all supposed to happen the week of March 20th, 2020.
Okay, how'd that go for you?
Yeah, how do you think that went, right? Like the whole world shut down that week. So we decided to release a book anyway. So finally, the world has gotten back to order in ways, and you have to understand this. Like as recent as last year, there were schools who would not let strangers into the building. Right, we were still in lockdown or semi-lockdown as late as last spring. So 2 weeks ago, we spent a full week filming in 10 different classrooms for all of this to be released. It's not ready for release yet. It's going to be embedded within a forthcoming book, but the video's been shot. A lot of work has to be done on that still, but all the video exists.
That's great.
That's pretty cool. Yeah.
Except here's a funny thing. Teachers say, yeah, I want to see a whole lesson start to finish. What does that look like? I want to see the whole thing. I want to see the whole 60 to 75 minutes. I want it right there. I'm willing to bet serious money that no teacher is going to sit through 60 minutes of video of a lesson. They're going to fast forward like crazy.
100%.
But we want to see what these things look like in Manifest. Now, if you want to see what it looks like, all you have to do is go on social media. There's probably 100 videos every day posted of kids working in these settings, on Twitter, on Facebook. Yeah. Like these communities are robust, right? Like the Facebook communities, there's over 35 Facebook groups dedicated to building thinking classrooms. There's primary ones, there's intermediate ones, there's science ones, there's language arts ones. The main group has over 50,000 teachers in it. There's a Danish one, there's a Australian one, there's a French one, there's a Spanish one. Like these groups are robust. They are incredible communities. They're all started by teachers, and they all are designed to support each other. There is so much resources in there for anybody who wants to join one of those groups.
I didn't want to create trouble, but I just thought it would be something additional. But given that we don't yet have the QR codes, and I just wanted to let people know that the book is very specific, that teachers can really pick this up. And, in the chapter, Peter was talking about the random groups. There are specifics like use one marker for the whole group and have the person who has the erasable marker only write the ideas that other students give to them. And so there are a lot of these specifics in the book. So teachers can really pick this up and learn from it. And we do look forward to the QR codes, and we'll poke around social media too.
Now, I just want to say one last thing here, because this is a podcast for leaders.
Yes.
you might be curious about like, okay, that's great, but like, what does implementation look like? What's the rollout look like? So that was another 2 years of my research. I spent after we had all 14 practices, the optimal practices, we spent 2 years researching what order to implement these in. Because if something as simple as having students stand up makes a difference, then where we start makes a difference. So that 2 years was well spent, and it revealed that where do we start? We start exactly where we talked about today. Thinking tasks, random groups, vertical surfaces. That's where we start. And the research also clearly shows that we start with those 3 practices at the same time. And once that's up and running, we move to what's called the next toolkit. The next toolkit has 5 practices in it. There you do them one at a time. The order doesn't matter. But the book lays all of this out.
Yes, yes. It's very clear. It's in the book. It's in my summary of the book that's coming out pretty soon. And yeah, any last words for school principals, math department chairs, district leaders about best ideas for introducing the ideas in your book?
Okay, so let's go back 170 years to the dawn of public education. Okay, it started at the end of
Do
the
we have to?
Yeah. It's a glorious time. It started at the end of the first industrial revolution, right? When the economic powers in the world realized that if they wanted to remain economic powers, they had to educate their citizens. And so public education was formed, right? Now, at the dawn of public education, the goals of education were explicitly conformity and compliance. That was the goals of education. 19th century classrooms were designed to develop conformity and compliance. What my research showed is that the majority of the practices that were laid down, those routines and normative structures and institutional norms that were laid down in the 19th century, are still in our 21st century classrooms. Our goals are different now, though, right? We're talking about critical and creative thinking. We're talking about 21st century learning skills. We're talking about equity. We have different goals now. There is no way we can achieve those goals using practices that were forged in the crucible of conformity and compliance. We're trying to achieve 21st century goals using 19th century classrooms. Something has to change. Either we have to abandon our goals or we're going to have to revolutionize our classrooms. And by revolutionize, I'm not talking about tearing down walls and making the bell schedule a 9 to 5 and sending people out into the field. I'm just talking about, how about we get them out of their desks? How about we stop talking so much? How about if we stop beating students with 35 minutes of note taking? Like, how about we start doing some things differently so that we leave room to think? How about we create spaces that are not only conducive to thinking, they encourage thinking and they necessitate thinking, as opposed to trying to operate in spaces that are primarily designed for conformity and compliance. We can't ask students to behave differently if we don't change the environment.
So, Peter, I'm sure you've thought about this as a researcher. Have you thought about following any of these students longitudinally, like taking a look at, what happens to kids who are exposed to thinking classrooms for, a certain amount of time and these different strategies and pedagogical approaches, and then to see, do they take higher level math? Do they do better in higher level math? How do they do when they get to college? Things like that. Is that part of the equation for later? Ooh, good math.
Yeah, I hope it is. It may not be me. Like, Building Thinking Classrooms is now out there, right? Like, over 200,000 copies sold. It's in 12 languages. It's got this massive momentum. There are literally hundreds of people doing master's degrees on this topic. Some are doing PhDs on it all over the world. Eventually someone's going to say, this is a question I want to answer. And like, I would like the answer to it. I don't have time to do that right now. I'm running around the whole world trying to help people launch their thinking classrooms. But yeah, it is a question that I'm curious about. I think I know the answer because anecdotally we hear what happens. Massive shifts in identity and affect, students feeling self-confident, a flip to growth mindset. There's just higher self-efficacy, higher performance. Like, we're seeing all of this stuff anecdotally. The data will support that. but it's like, if we want a robust answer to that, it's going to take years, right?
And Peter, this is unbelievable work. And I honestly, I could listen to you talk all day. This is fantastic. And the book is Building Thinking Classrooms in Mathematics, 14 Teaching Practices for Enhancing Learning. Dr. Peter Liljedahl, I got it right again.
Yeah.
And Peter, if people want to follow your work, is there a website or anywhere you want to send them?
Yeah. So buildingthinkingclassrooms.com. It's a bit of a mess right now because we're building a brand new website. So I've kind of been neglecting it. But buildingthinkingclassrooms.com. On Facebook groups, just go into Facebook, search under groups, search Building Thinking Classrooms. On Twitter, hashtag Thinking Classroom, or me at PG Liljedahl will find me. You'll find tons of stuff. Or you just go into Google and search Building Thinking Classrooms, and all of this will pop up. There's lots of places you can find this stuff.
Well, Peter, thank you again. We appreciate it. The book is fantastic. We will certainly link to your website in the show notes and send more people your way. This, I know we say this occasionally, Jen, but not too often. I feel a part two with Peter at some point.
Well, just let's get that invitation going.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it. We appreciate that you put this book out into the world at a time when we certainly need it. It's a shame it didn't come 25 years ago when I was teaching high school math, but that's okay. I think you've definitely paid it forward in a really positive way. So thank you. Well, another great thing to come out of the wonderful country of Canada. Thank you, Peter.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the School Leadership Show, a podcast for aspiring and practicing school leaders. Send your comments, questions, and show ideas to me, Mike, at schoolleadershipshow.com. And please consider rating the podcast in iTunes and leaving a comment. And definitely pass the show along to your colleagues.